It's Halloween. That means it's time for a new 31 on 31. This year's theme, pain and suffering. If you're new to 31 on 31, essentially what we do is we pick 31 horror movies to rank on October 31st. This year's theme, pain and suffering. We looked at 4 horror franchises: Hellraiser, Wrong Turn, Saw, and Hostel. If you add up all of the movies in each of those franchises, you get 31 movies, and that's what 31 on 31 is. As I share my list, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all the movies in each of these franchises that you have seen. 31 on 31 is a series from the Autop stream. That's Cody Leach, Brian Lomax, CP, and myself. And this year we have special guests, Gen X Reviews, joining in as well. Each of us will be sharing our own ranking. Participate in the whole 31 on 31 experience. Go to each of their videos as they post. Join in the comments section, comment on their insane picks as well as my insane picks, and let's get started. Coming in last place, Wrong Turn 5, Bloodlines. Now, when it comes to this set of 31 films, there's a lot of terrible movies, like they're competing for the bottom. But the champion of the crap, the one that easily defeated the others in incompetence and just terrible storytelling, Wrong Turn 5, Bloodlines. It's kind of like Rio Bravo or Assault on Precinct 13, 2 very good movies, except nihilistic and empty, where nothing matters. It's just nonstop, unearned cruelty. It does not matter what any character does, they still die. Their choices do not impact the story or the outcome. There are no character arcs. It's just a series of people being killed in cruel, brutal ways. The hillbillies are moronic, simplistic Neanderthals who are also invulnerable and super clever and always can catch people. And the part that's just so painful about it is that they put Pinhead in here. So, to be fair, he has more screen presence than anyone else in this thing, and they put him in there, and it's a total nothing character. He just keeps saying, "My boys are coming. My boys are coming," in his nice, thick, booming voice. No backstory, no explanation as to connection ties in here. Just a guy in a cell saying, "My boys are coming," and being just a totally disgusting, gross character. The tone is bizarre, where the hillbillies are just like hee, cackling all the time, hee, and like running over people's heads with lawnmowers. And then it cuts to just these such like gross, disgusting ideas about like implied rape of a character who's been blind, where you're like, oh, come on now, really, this is where we're going with this. I need to take a shower with where they took it this whole other direction. It's just cruelty for cruelty's sake. Just a disaster of a movie. Number 30, Hellraiser 6, Hellseaker. Out during this era of the franchise, they were direct-to-video, and all of the movies feel like they were spec scripts, something that someone wrote totally unrelated to the franchise, and then someone went, why don't we just throw Pinhead in at the end? And they convert it into a Hellraiser movie. And with some of them, that's kind of been confirmed to have been the case. And there are also all these investigation stories with a last-second plot twist, and it's always the same plot twist. And this is another one of these movies. The reason why this is the most offensive of the bunch to me is that it has the return of Christy, essentially the star of the first 2 movies. We're going to bring her back. So they throw her in there, and you're like, cool, what's she been up to? And it turns out, no, that's not really what's happening here. She's not a character in the movie, she's a plot device. So we kill her off at the beginning and then kind of go off on this whole investigation journey about her deadbeat husband and how he was awful and all this other stuff. It's unsatisfying, it's unpleasant, it's a horrible way to use the character. And when you take a character and that you're cheating the audience, it's a bait and switch. Oh, look, we've got the original. We're really doing a proper sequel to the first 2 movies. No, you're not. No, you're not. You cheated. This doesn't feel like a Hellraiser movie. This feels like a crappy episode of The Twilight Zone except with very loose ties to the Hellraiser franchise. You cheated the audience. You did a bait and switch. You broke trust and made a crappy movie. Like, it's the same investigation crap as Inferno, the last one. It's the same last-minute plot twist as the last one. And it's like mildly satisfying. Okay, she outsmarted the guy. That's the only thing in this movie that has any value. Otherwise, how dare you use her character to try and elevate this crap. 29, Hellraiser 7, Deader. This movie feels like a generic discount Flatliners ripoff that was last minute converted into a Hellraiser movie.
As a matter of fact, it was.
Several of the other movies in this time period feel like they were converted into Hellraiser movies last minute. Scott Derrickson's movie, he contests the fact that that happened. With this one, seems to be pretty well confirmed. The reason this one is so far down on the list is that it is so utterly forgettable. Now, I watched through all of the Hellraiser movies last year when the new one came out. It was my first time watching through them. I took notes. I read the Wikipedia pages. I did everything I could to get a flavor for the whole franchise. And then I rewatched each of the movies to do this particular 31 on 31. When I started this one, it had only been 1 year since I last watched these movies. I had no recollection of anything at all that took place in the movie. I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Kind of like a flatline. Okay, I think I kind of remember this. It's a movie that just has nothing about it to remember. Nothing to stand out. It makes zero impression at all. And then they try and find just the absolute laziest way to tie it into the lore with occult leaders tied to the toy maker. This so clearly feels like this separate thing that they just mashed a little pinhead in there in at the last minute, but it does not in any way stand out or make an impression. 28, Wrong Turn 4, Bloody Beginnings. And my feelings on this film are very similar to that of Wrong Turn 5. This one is just slightly less gross, but the guy that directed this set of Wrong Turn films is just obsessed with this nihilistic cruelty where characters just die no matter what. They make the stupidest choices, or whatever the effort they put forth doesn't matter. It's just for the sake of punching the audience in the gut repeatedly. You think there's hope? Just kidding. And then we have 30 minutes of college students getting lost and then gross torture. The cruelty, the stuff that just feels so unearned. They capture these hillbillies that are trying to kill them, and someone goes, "We shouldn't kill them." And another guy's like, "Yeah, we should. They're psychos that are skinning people alive." And we shouldn't kill them. And of course, the hillbillies are able to escape and kill them. The girls accidentally kill the guy that said we should kill them. The guy that was kill them, they're dangerous. The girls that say, don't kill them, those girls kill the guy that wanted to kill the people that tried to kill them. That's sort of you're just picking the nastiest twist, the nastiest spin on it in a way that just feels nasty and unearned. You get to the end of the movie, it feels like they're going to escape. Just kidding. One of the people goes for rescue. They get so close. Just kidding. They freeze to death. It's just always picking the nastiest possible outcome of every plot point. So there's no sense of victory or satisfaction because it's always the same end. The worst outcome. That's not clever. That's not witty. You have to have the back and forth working to overcome things so you can feel a sense of victory. Likewise, someone strives and fails, has a character fault that leads there to there's none of that. There's no storytelling. It's just a setup for cruel, nasty sequences. Next up, Hellraiser Revelation. Now, this is one of the two ultra low budget Hellraiser films, and the reason it's not lower on the list is because it feels like it's actually trying to tie into the original Hellraiser mythology and the way things kind of worked in the first couple of films, while being the ultra low budget, cheapy, found footage version of it. But there's at least some kind of connective tissue in what characters are doing, someone being brought back, people being lured in, stealing skin. That goes back to the first two movies. I can mildly appreciate that. From there, you just have a terrible movie. Like, it starts off to what's the cheapest way to make a movie? Do found footage with a camcorder. But of course, it's edited, there's multiple camera angles, so it's bad found footage while doing that. There's just weird ideas in here where like a brother and sister get to third base. Start making out and you're like, ugh. Okay, I know there's going to be a twist here, but what are we doing here? The movie goes so hard where you have Nico snap the neck of a baby, and you're like, wow, we're really going for it in this movie, but it never really feels like it justifies why Steven is like doing any of this stuff to help his skinless meat friend. There's just a lot of just cheap, nasty stuff in here, and Pinhead looks ridiculous. So, like, I don't know why they picked this guy. They saw that look and they went, yeah, that looks about right. It just looks like cheap or bad Pinhead cosplay. It doesn't work at all. 26, Wrong Turn 6, Last Resort. Another one of these just wild, bonkers, direct-to-video, wrong turn movies. This one adds just this wild, crazy lore that I have no idea how it fits in with all the rest of the lore of the previous films, where they're hanging out at this spa and killing old people, and there's family members that aren't nearly as inbred of hillbillies, and there's this cult group in the woods or something like that. All this stuff, it's not remotely compatible with anything else that's been established in the franchise. And they add a lot of like horny incest into it, where like very uncomfortable, raunchy scenes between family members, but it actually has a plot. There actually is like a character arc here, where there's a person who's established to have certain desires. He's trying to figure himself out, discovers this family he didn't know that he had, and there's an actual change development as he goes through this, and he turns into a monster, but there's actual development there. There's something that the events of the plot shift a character, take him to a different place by the end of the movie, in which case that immediately makes it better than the Wrong Turn films lower on the list, where nothing at all mattered. It was just cruelty. It's not like a movie that I'm like, that was awesome, it's good now. No, it's still not good, but at least it has some actual attempts at being a movie. Then we have Hellraiser Inferno. Now, this one is interesting because, first off, it kicked off the direct-to-video era of Hellraiser movies. Second, it was written and directed by Scott Derrickson, who went on to become kind of a legend in the horror space, did a Marvel movie, did Black Phone last year, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And if they announced that Scott Derrickson was doing a Hellraiser movie now, it'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what he's going to bring to the table. Well, he did do one 20 years ago, and it's not very good. Third thing that's interesting about it is that there's actual debate as to whether this one was written to be a Hellraiser movie or whether it was adapted from a separate story. Pinhead himself, Bradley, said this was written separately and they converted it into a Hellraiser movie, but Scott Derrickson insists he wrote this movie to be a Hellraiser film, which is weird because it feels like an extended episode of The Twilight Zone with Pinhead squished in at the very end of the film. It doesn't match the mythology that was established by the previous films. It has very little to do with the mythology of the previous films. The genre is all new, and I think it would work better as just kind of this generic investigation film with a big twist ending than as a Hellraiser film, because it just feels unsatisfying on both levels. You're like, why is this a Hellraiser movie? Like, where's Pinhead? What's going on here? And then as the detective story with a twist ending at the end, it just feels kind of like this, what? Like, huh? Like, what's going on here? Like, they don't really serve each other. So it's better done than the ones at the bottom. It's mildly more interesting because it was the first of these detective type stories thrown in here, but still just a totally forgettable film that doesn't match the franchise. The Hellraiser Judgement. This is another one that I went into just expecting the absolute worst. I'd only heard horrible things about the post-Bradley Pinhead films, and so I went into this one really not knowing what to expect. And not that I love the movie or all that much, but I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised that it worked well enough on its own terms. It's essentially a reworking of the mythology with its own kind of set of rules, its own handling of what's going on with Pinhead, the Cenobites, and all of kind of those different elements, in which case it's able to kind of tell its own thing without feeling like it's just rehashing what came before. It can break some mythology because it's creating its own mythology, and it's weird enough and interesting enough on its own terms. Now, it is another one of these direct-to-video films that is about this police investigation where there's a serial killer. What's going on with this person? Same plot twist as all the other ones. The person investigating was the person behind it all along, though at least this time the events actually did occur. And so it feels maybe too reminiscent of what was done in too many of those other films while doing a better version of it. By the time you've watched 10 of these movies in a week, it's like, okay, yeah, you got some fresh new things in here, but yeah, once again, investigation, once again, same twist. There's a lot of things that are a little bit too familiar, too much of what I'd seen too many times before. And it kind of found like new ways to creep you out and be weird, where there's like this guy that's eating pages that have been written on a typewriter, and then he's vomiting them in a tube, and it's spraying on like, ew. Just like weird, unsettling stuff in an all new way. That's kind of what elevated this one for me, is there's actual new different stuff in here. A lot of same stuff, but a bunch of weird, creepy new things that actually made me go, ugh, besides just, skinning people alive. Though we do skin some people alive here too. 23, Wrong Turn, 3, Left 4 Dead. And of the Wrong Turn movies, this is where they're not good, but at least they're not unbelievably irritating or just so creepy and gross with the amount of trashy incest thrown in there. This one, it deals with a group of convicts who try to escape, and they make a wrong turn and crash in hillbilly land. It's derivative, but it's a workable formula. It fits the franchise. Like, if you're going to do a direct-to-video wrong turn movie, I go, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. That makes sense if you're trying to find a new way to put people up against the hillbillies. People that would be interesting, violent convicts against violent, deadly hillbillies. All right, sure. That works well enough. It's not breaking into new ground. It's not great, but there's plenty of low-budget, cheesy, schlocky gore and violence to be had here with this particular formula. Very low-budget movie, but they were able to film at a prison, do a bus crash, several other things that kind of have some production value to it that made it feel like it has some size. Now, there's some terrible CGI gore here. There's a part where a guy gets cut in half, and they don't track the meat inside of him with his body on the outside, so you can see the meat on the inside stays still while his body's wiggling just a little bit. So it's kind of fun to see terrible CGI gore in a movie like this. There's some really lazy writing. 3 separate times in the movie, someone escapes from the bad guy, and shortly afterwards, the bad guy is not only able to find him, but is ahead of him. Even one time they jump in a car, drive away, and the bad guy's just in front of him. Just that lazy, unearned, repetitious plot lines. So it's not good. But if you're going to do a cheap, schlocky, Left 4 Dead direct-to-video sequel, this is kind of what I expect to get out of that. 22, Hellraiser 8, Hellworld. To be perfectly clear, this is a terrible Hellraiser movie, but a pretty fun, generic direct-to-video slasher film that's elevated by a little bit of lucky casting with a young Henry Cavill thrown in the mix. And then legacy casting of Lance Henriksen, who's always great in everything. So you take this franchise, Hellraiser, strip away any of the class, any of the atmosphere that was created in the first couple of films, and make it this schlocky, goofy concept where Hellraiser is a video game in the world of this film, and throw people at a party, and they slowly get killed off. It's schlocky, it's goofy, but if we're at the 8th Hellraiser movie, this franchise has already totally lost its way. Would I rather watch this one, or 5, or 6, or 7? Yeah, I'd rather watch this one than those ones, because it embraces that it's a bad direct-to-video sequel and has fun with it. And legitimately, when you're watching a bad movie, and you're just like, hey, like, that's Henry Cavill. Like, he's bringing a little bit of fun. You get to see him early in his career. It just adds a little bit of something to it. And like I said, Lance Henriksen, always great whenever you see him in something. So a movie that got very lucky through some star power, some of it even unintentional, with Henry Cavill. As a Hellraiser movie, it really is terrible, because, like, what on earth? It's a video game? How does that tie into it? What's going on with this final twist? Just, what are we doing here? But it's more watchable than the movies lower on this list, and more fun than the movies lower on this list. Number 21, Saw 3D. Now, when I was prepping this video, starting to watch through all of these movies, I started it with the Saw films, obviously, because Saw X came out a month ago. And like the bottom Saw films, at the time I was like, man, these are so frustrating, because like it has all the traps and the fun of that, but the traps, the people in the game are so detached from the Hoffman investigation. These movies are just kind of a mess. And then I watched the Wrong Turn movies again. And then I watched the Hellraiser movies again. It was like, okay, there's actually something charming about all the Saw films. As bad as the Saw films get, they still have a certain allure to the nature of the franchise that elevates it above these other franchises that just went so off the rails that they completely lost anything that they were about. As messy as some Saw films got, I think they all still they always have the charm of feeling like the franchise as a whole is addictive in a way that is, and it had its momentum. Like, when you're binging through the Saw movies, like, you want to get to the next one to see what's going to happen next and what will happen with Hoffman. There's none of that. There's no franchise momentum or any consistency in lore with Hellraiser and the Wrong Turn franchises. So, we're still not particularly high on this list. So, when you get to Saw 3D, the lore is just so convoluted at this point in time. Hoffman has escaped so many times. So many people are out to get him that we've already played out all the things you can do that make sense. So we're just being repetitious at this point in time. You get some great de-aging for Jigsaw in this movie, where he turns his cap backwards and immediately looks years younger.
Your name, sir?
John. How do you do, fellow kids?
But by this point in time in the franchise, I think they just were cranking out movies so fast that they couldn't actually make good scripts. So you have the game over here, and sometimes you just have dream sequences to get extra gore and kills in there, and it's all totally separate from our actual plot of our movie about Hoffman trying to escape. And they bring back Cary Elwes for a couple scenes, just totally wasted, underdeveloped, and there was a better plot right there of just make the movie about that. Kick it off with Jill's death. Kill her off at the beginning, and you have the disciples of Jigsaw tracking down the rogue disciple of Jigsaw. That's an interesting movie right there. Like, I'm pitching this as I'm saying this, like, yeah, that's what it could have been. That would have been really interesting. Instead, they picked something so unsatisfying. I don't like Hoffman. I don't think he's interesting. I don't think any of this is earned, so that's why it's the lowest of the Saw films. Kicking off our top 20, Saw 6. Now, this is by far one of my hottest horror takes.
How dare you!
I didn't know it was going to be a hot horror take. Like, I watched Saw 6 and I was like, oh my goodness, what? Like, why can't anyone ever catch Hoffman? Why are we focusing so much on Hoffman? I don't think this guy's interesting at all. The game that's being played feels like an utter violation of everything that made the franchise interesting with Jigsaw's rules. Now, Jigsaw's rule, like, he's never been particularly consistent with his rules, but this one, it's literally like, there was some sort of idea, if you play by the rules, you can survive. Then you get to this one, and there's literally like people being shotgunned in the chest. A bunch of people are gonna die no matter what, which is a violation. And so, like, in my comments, people are like, oh, that's great, the shotgun roulette. Like, no, it's not great. That's a violation.
murderer.
I despise murderers.
And then I think that the whole plot line here is pretty, like, irresponsible, where it's like the Saw franchise is not an appropriate place to tackle the issues of healthcare in America. It's a franchise about a serial killer torturing people to death. And so presenting that as a mechanism to explore who pays for healthcare and why healthcare isn't covered and the practices of health insurance. Like, what are you saying here? That insurance agents deserve to die because of the policies up top? Come on, this is irresponsible. So people tell me this one is one of the best, like, because the traps just... I don't see it. I don't get it. I thought this movie was just more of Hoffman crap. Of course, he can never be like, he always escapes in the end. He can even get out of the reverse bear trap and rips his face open. He can escape. Ugh. I don't like this movie, and I don't get why you guys do. Number 19, Wrong Turn to Dead End. This is the first of our direct-to-video Wrong Turn sequels, and for some reason, legendary punk icon Henry Rollins of Black Flag is in this movie.
Why?
If you're gonna do a direct-to-video cheap knockoff, essentially knocking off your own franchise, essentially Wrong Turn movie, I guess this is fine. It's goofier, it's bloodier, there's more kills, it's more over the top, it's more overt, the hillbillies are creepier, there's more implications of all the incest and everything. Sure. Okay, it does its thing. There's also, as I keep talking about with these direct-to-video sequels, there's more nihilism in it, where the original Wrong Turn, like, people are able to get away. If someone sacrifices themselves for others, it benefits people. And when you get to this movie, it's just nothing matters. And you start to get that flavor where choices have no impact at all. Like, you can't just always be nihilistic. And that's what these Wrong Turn direct-to-video sequels turned into. Another one on here, according to the internet, the budget for this movie was $4 million. The original Saw had a budget of less than $1 million. Saw 2 had a budget of $4 million. I don't know if this was like a laundering scheme or what, and just the producers are just running off with money, but Saw 1 and 2 look better than this movie, have more star power than this movie. It's a fine direct-to-video. Like, if you're into Wrong Turn and want more of that, it delivers more of it. But at the same time, I don't know why you would choose to watch this one rather than rewatching the first one, for me personally. 18, Saw 4. Now, this is where Lee Winnell, writer of the original Saw, stopped writing the film, stopped really being particularly heavily involved. Same with James Wan. And when it's kind of got taken over by other people. And I think that really shows. Likewise, this is the first movie post-death of Jigsaw. This is where Hoffman becomes prominent. And I think all of that just really shows with this movie, where it just kind of turned into this machine. We need to crank out more Saw movies because they're cheap and they make a lot of money. And so I just, this is where the stuff that really frustrates me in this franchise became most prominent. Now, on the memorable side, it does start off with a very graphic autopsy of Jigsaw, where we get a little bit of Jigsaw wiener in there. So that's something. But from there, you get, like, the cop that's being tested. Like, they're always trying to have a message. The music crescendos at the end, and the tape recorder's playing, and Jigsaw says it. And it's like, the lesson is, you need to try to not save people. They need to save themselves. To a cop. Like, his job is to save people. Like, you need to not rush in to save people. What? What are you talking about here? So this is, like, the standout in this movie is Scott Patterson, who I think has just a little bit more screen presence and charisma. Certainly more than Hoffman. But we decided to go with Hoffman and not Scott Patterson's character. Like, I I don't understand where we're going here. This is where we start having way too many flashbacks, and the movie is like tracking an investigation, has people in the game, plus a zillion flashbacks. So it starts getting weird at this point to me. 17, Hellraiser 4 Bloodlines. Now, given that this movie is credited to Alan Smithy, which means the director thought the movie was so bad that he pulled his name off of it and used Alan Smithy instead.
I got a bad feeling about this.
And given that it features Hellraiser in space,
I have a bad feeling about this.
it's actually not too bad. It sounds much stupider than it actually is. Now, it's number 17 on the list, so it's not particularly high, and it's number 17 on a list where there's not very many good films. So I'm not saying that the movie's awesome, but it's better than it feels like it should be in light of the Alan Smithy and Hellraiser in space. There's some interesting ideas in here where we get the origin of the lament configuration box, this whole kind of backstory, and then we track the history of the box with the lineage of the family that created it. There's some ideas in there that aren't too bad, that are kind of interesting. There's some surprise faces from some actors that are recognized, like, oh, hey, look who it is. That's kind of fun. But, you know, it's a movie where you can feel the production issues, where the director, writers, producers all had different visions, so they kept reworking the film. And it's silly. As soon as you take your horror icon and send him into space, we're getting wacky. In particular, with something like Hellraiser that has a very specific atmospheric vibe to it, and like, let's just go to space. Or maybe we shouldn't go to space. So, I don't know. It's not as bad as it probably should be. It's not particularly good either. Next up, Saw 5, and of the Hoffman era of Saw films, this is my favorite of the bunch, while it still essentially repeats the mistakes and issues that I have with Saw 4, Saw 6, and Saw 3D. What elevates this one for me is that the actors that are in the game itself I find more compelling. I'm more invested in them. They're more memorable. A lot of it's because it's Julie Benz. It has the lady that's in the Shazam family, Milo from 24. Several actors that I've seen in other things, and they pop a little bit more. There's a backstory of how they're intertwined with what they were involved in outside of all of this that led them to be putting in the trap. It's just a little bit more memorable. But like all the stuff with Hoffman, I guess I appreciate that we're getting his backstory, understanding how he got in this position, answering questions I wasn't actually asking, but maybe perhaps matter if we're going to make Hoffman the star of the franchise for the next few films. The thing that bugs me about, like, this one probably could have been up even more spots on the list, just bugs me so much that Scott Patterson's character that's more likable, that's resourceful, that figures it out, and then the movie just decides, but Hoffman's smarter. And so they don't give us any explanation as to how Hoffman is playing all this 4D chess and there's always so many things ahead. He doesn't come off that witty, that smart. He's just the guy that the screenwriter decides always is victorious. So our resourceful detective that catches him actually caught himself in a trap. And so ending with him dying in this box, I find it unpleasant and unsatisfying. I wish that didn't happen. We had something different go on here, but once again, I don't like Hoffman. 15, Jigsaw. Now, I understand a lot of Saw purists, original OG Saw fans, hate this one, throw it way down at the bottom. I've never been in that camp. Perhaps it's because at the time this movie came out, I was brand new to the Saw franchise. I watched all of the Saw films for the first time in preparation for seeing Jigsaw, so thus, obviously, Jigsaw was the first Saw movie I ever saw in the theater. And without kind of that long backstory, and without being a part of the original Saw ride in the Zeros, like, I didn't think it was great or anything like that, but it felt like a decent enough Saw film, simply because the one Saw films I have lower on this list, it just always bugged me so much the way that the game itself and the Hoffman investigation are totally detached from each other. It's just like, we have to have someone in a game, but we don't have enough time to come up with a plot that intertwines these things. I just thought that was so lazy, and I don't like Hoffman. I don't care about Hoffman. And with Jigsaw, it feels like like, roll your eyes. Oh, right, there's another secret apprentice. There's another person we didn't know about. There was another game we didn't know about.
Kramer gave people a chance to win the game. You have a choice. Scream or don't.
But it kind of has its own self-contained story in here that works well enough. It's also like, roll your eye. Like, we found another excuse to bring Jigsaw back, but not really. Kind of roll your eyes at it. The timeline doesn't work on everything, but like, as just like this little pocket Saw film, it works well enough for me. Number 14, Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. Now, this is a tricky one for me because it's such an odd mix of good ideas and bad execution. The basic plot here of what they're doing and the focus on Pinhead himself is a major win. The idea that Pinhead himself is trying to consume souls so he can be brought back onto the earth with his Cenobites, creating Cenobites to have hell on earth. That feels like a great plot line for a Hellraiser movie. And just based on the synopsis, I'd say that's like one of maybe our best plot line for a Hellraiser movie, where our star guy Pinhead gets to be front and center and wreaks havoc. Just so much opportunity for carnage in that setup. But there's some truly bad performances in here. There's some horrible dialogue in here, and some truly awful ideas where you literally have a Cenobite who shoots CDs out of his head.
You serious?
He's like they have like CDs fly around his head. Boop! Cenobite, CD head. What are we doing? How is this a thing in this franchise where you just go like, you took a setup, might be the best setup, and you did something so goofy, so silly that you just knocked your movie down? Why did you do this? Why did you sabotage your own movie? You still get some nasty gore. Of the this era of Hellraiser movies, you get a slicker production, more mainstream, so much so that, in the credits, we got Motorhead blasting a song that Ozzy Osbourne, I don't remember if Motorhead wrote it for Ozzy Osbourne, or Ozzy Osbourne wrote it and Motorhead played it, but like, you've got this big, gigantic icons of rock playing a song over the credits. I do like the strong focus on Pinhead. I do like getting to see Dax from DS9 in the show, or in the movie, but come on now. What are we doing with CD Head? Number 13, Hostel Part 3. Now, I am brand new to the Hostel franchise. I had never seen any of them until a week ago, and then I watched all 3 of them over 2 days in preparation, of course, for this video. I actually knew very little about the plot, very little about the mythology, and I didn't even have an idea of what to expect from the movies after the first one or anything like that. And so I went in knowing that this was, the third part, direct-to-video several years later, and directed by Scott Spiegel. So Scott Spiegel is a guy who is most famous essentially for who he's friends with. He's friends with Sam Raimi, and he helped co-write Evil Dead 2. He's friends with Quentin Tarantino, in which case there was a scenario where they almost did a Halloween movie. I think it was going to be a different version of Halloween 6. But as for movies he's directed, like From Dusk Till Dawn 2, the direct-to-video one with the T-1000, that's kind of what he as a director himself, he gets like direct-to-video stuff. So he gets Hostel Part 3. So I went into it with fairly low expectations, and for me, if you're going to do a direct-to-video Hostel film, this is kind of as good as I can expect it to be. I went, like, the opening scene, I thought it did a good job of subverting expectations in the good way, where they create a tension where you think it's heading in one direction, you think one group of people are the bad guys, and it actually kind of surprises you. And the whole movie has some twists and turns. Not that this is like a great, amazing film, but if you're doing a direct-to-video Hostel film, I think this one kind of actually delivered. when you move into the third act, it definitely turns into a bit of an action movie with the guys running around with a machine gun. I like action movies, so I don't hate that. There's at least one torture sequence in here that was like, oh, that's horrifying, where the guy peels the girl's face off. That stuff really weirds me out, grosses me out. So they effectively grossed me out with one of these torture sequences that did something that left a mark and was memorable. I don't know. I think that this is a perfectly fine direct-to-video Hostel film. Number 12, Wrong Turn 2021, the reimagining. And if you're going to radically reimagine the Wrong Turn franchise, which I think you kind of needed to do after all those direct-to-video sequels, actually does a pretty good job of it, where they try and find the central experience of the franchise, which is people get lost in the woods and encounter these violent primitives, but they don't do the same thing. And you can't really go back to the cackling hillbillies after how far they just ground that into, just overdid that, made it cheesy as can be with all the direct-to-video sequels. So they went let's come up with a different idea that has different ways to be horrifying. And I think it worked. Also, I think what they wisely did was they spaced out our plot beats pretty nicely, where it kicks off and the tension is these big city people wrestling with the small town people. And it kind of makes you you don't really like anybody because our big city people are so condescending and the small town people are so nasty and abrasive that you're like, I don't really know that I like anybody here. But we just do a little bit of that tension and it sets up kind of a turn later in the film. And then we have the part where they go in the woods and get lost. Then we have the part where they're being hunted. Then we have the part where they're being brought into this weird cult people society. And then we have the escape and epilogue. And so it's a movie that kind of has these different segments, so you never feel like you're overstaying one dynamic for too long. Thought it worked well enough. So it's not like a movie that I just would gravitate to just rewatch on my own or anything like that. But given what they did with so many bad direct-to-video sequels, it was like, yeah, if you're going to do it again, this is the way to do it. This is a way to refresh things a little bit, bring something new to the table, and actually be horrifying in a new way. Number 11, Hostel. Now, as I just told you, I watched this movie for the first time just a week ago. And, after watching it, was messaging with Cody Leach, kind of talking about it. And, he talked about how, when he first watched it, it really messed him up back nearly 20 years ago. Felt like he was watching a snuff film. And I imagine if I'd watched this film for the first time when it came out 18 years ago or whatever, probably would have been much more impactful for me. Had hit me much harder. However, having watched 1,000 Saw movies prior to watching Hostel, having seen Terrifier 2 prior to seeing Hostel, some of the edge of just the pure sadism of it gets lost a little bit. When you've seen enough people being tortured to death in other franchises, probably doesn't hit quite as hard. And you kind of get a movie that's pretty basic. When it came out, its influence, I don't want to diminish that, but that wasn't my experience with it. So for me, I started watching it and literally got 30 minutes in and messaged Cody like, hey man, I think I started the porn parody of Hostel because everywhere these guys go, they just run into girls that rip their clothes off and want to bang them. And then right afterwards, people start getting tortured to death. But it's pretty funny just how trashy Euro trip this movie is. And then it just hard shifts immediately into torture mode. And it goes from glossy European raves to grimy warehouse torture. And it is that grime that I think most stood out for this movie for me. That it's such a great, nasty atmosphere of ugh, I definitely don't want to die there. But on that story level, it is very simple. They want to party, they think they're getting their dream, turns out it's a nightmare, guy tries to escape. That's it. There's not any twists or turns. And even the third one had more twists and turns and cleverness to it. This one, it's just that atmosphere of oh crap, this is not what I wanted. Oh no, wait, these girls are really mean. If I'd seen it when it first came out, it probably would have hit, like I said, much harder. I'd have more impact for me and be higher on the list. But watching it when I did, it just felt a little bit. Kicking off our top 10, Spiral. Now, I know a lot of Saw fans hate this movie, have it way down at the bottom of their Saw rankings. It doesn't have Jigsaw in it. It's too different. Why is it so much of a police procedural? Chris Rock doesn't belong in here. I don't agree with any of that. For me, this one felt like it was getting back to what I think really worked about the first couple of Saw films, which is to say that they're kind of like Seven Light. They are kind of these police investigations, except with more overt gore and spending time seeing people in the traps. But that aesthetic of the investigation that was very prominent in the first couple of films, this gets back to that. It has more of an overt plot where you're following a character doing an investigation, learning about his backstory, slowly unfolding the conspiracy that led to this person doing these Jigsaw-esque traps. That's what I want. I think some of them are kind of, there's an irony, a twist to each of them. So someone talked, therefore their tongue is attached to a thing up in the sky.
Only your weight will rip away your lying tongue and save you.
They do some stuff like that. I mean, by the end of it, some of it's all a little bit generic. Some of it's a little bit too predictable. It's not at the top of my Saw ranking, but I think as for like making a movie with a character that's a little bit more memorable, more charismatic, I think you get that with Chris Rock. Like I said, the investigation gives us a little bit more plot to work with here. So I don't really understand the hate. Number 9, Hellbound Hellraiser 2. And this is another one that's a little bit frustrating for me because there's a bunch of things about it where I think it improves upon the original. It does all the things that I liked about the original one, but just ups the game a little bit. But in the third act, it just makes some choices where I go, what? Why did you do that? So when it comes to the start of the movie, it's a little bit of a rehash. We're kind of doing the same thing with a person trying to bring people back from the back using blood, consuming the souls and flesh of victims to rise someone up. So we're kind of doing that same thing. But it's also used to be this big expansion of the lore where we're like literally going into hell, seeing this big, crazy hell world taking place. And even when it is rehashing stuff from the first one, I think it outdoes it. It does it bigger and more extravagant. And so, the first one feels very small. It's like this one house. Frank is in this one room. And here it's a bigger story, a bigger canvas to paint on, more creativity with what they can do in this context of everything that they're doing. So there's so many things about this one where I was like, oh, they did it better. And then it makes these choices in the end that knocks it back. In particular, our new Cenobite, Doctor Guy, defeats Pinhead and friends. And maybe this is one of those things they didn't realize how Pinhead was going to be the icon of the franchise when they wrote this movie or whatever. But like they're doing stuff like, oh, we're doing new stuff with Pinhead. Oh, we're seeing all this. Oh, cool. And then Pinhead gets nerfed. New guy takes him out. Like new guy you don't remember, new guy you don't care about. He takes out Pinhead. And you lost me. You lost me a little bit. So if they hadn't done that, if they'd kind of played it a little bit different, and this one probably would be on top of the first one because I just love how big and the grandeur and the 80s effects of what they did with hell and everything. Number 8, Saw 3, the final film in the Saw franchise before Jigsaw died in the present timeline. And of the Saw films, the one where I probably remember the game the most, with the specific journey that the guy is on, Robert the Bruce from Braveheart, of having to decide whether he's going to forgive these people that he blames for the death of his son, and the nature of like the rack and other ones, it's more vindictive, but they're also ones that stand out in my mind more so than really any of the other Saw films. This is the one where I remember the game easily the most, have the most vivid memories, even the stuff with the wife and Amanda, Jigsaw, and everything kind of going on with them. I think it just pops a little bit more. There are some oddities in the structure of the film where it's like 30 minutes before we're really even introduced to our main characters. We have multiple games, multiple things happen in the first 30 minutes, and then the plot kicks in. So it's structured really odd. I assume a lot of this just boils down to they're putting out a movie every year. You only have so much time to write a script before you have to start filming. So you have good ideas, but you don't necessarily have the time to massage them and tweak them and iterate them into a smooth story. I think you feel that a little bit with this one. And also I think when you have Jigsaw saying, I despise murderers, and then he straps a shotgun necklace to an innocent lady, dude, you're a murderer.
I'm a murderer.
I despise murderers.
You can't play your self-righteous games. You can't claim otherwise when you pull an innocent person in and they die because of what you did. Not because you strapped that on their head. So I think there's a little of that where you start to really feel the hypocrisy and nonsense of Jigsaw. Number 7, Hostel Part 2. And of all the movies on this list, this feels like the movie most saved by such a great last 15 minutes or so. Whereas the first hour of the movie, I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I see what you're doing here. We're kind of rehashing what we did in the first one, except it's girls. But we're also following some of the participants that are the clients paying to be a part of this. Like, okay. And then you get the last 15, 20 minutes, and I was like, oh, okay, this is better. This is like so much more fun, more audacious, more ridiculous than what we did at the end of the first one, and wittier and clever. So on the face value, the thing that you remember about the last 15 minutes about the film is, the what she holds hostage when trying to escape, where the scissors are applied to something else. And superficially, it's just so audacious, so shocking, like, whoa, they're going for it. And they keep going for it. Where you think, oh, we're just going to do that. And like, no, we're snipping, we're throwing. Wow, we just did that. But even deeper than that, however, like, the reason she wins is because she outsmarts him. She outmaneuvers him. She outspends him. She outclients him. It's not just the shock value. That's the thing that makes you go, whoa. And then where they go with it. What happens at that point in time. It's not just like she uses it, like walks out with it, anything like that. She actually outsmarts him in a way that you're like, oh, that's interesting. That's clever. I like what you did there. Other things in here, even just the switching from dudes being tortured to girls being tortured adds an extra layer of horrifying creepiness to it. In particular, as you have these two guys pick them out, interact with them at a party, flirt with them a little bit. And there's just such a gross ick factor of these men hunting them down in order to torture them. And of course, you also just have the fun little ideas in there of the one with the bravado. When he's faced with the reality of what he's doing, suddenly he's not the tough guy. And he backs out of it, doesn't want anything to do with it. And the one that's timid is the one actually repressing the anger. And so I just felt like this one, the first hour was like, okay, it's fine. It's more of the same, but a little bit more lore, not some atmosphere. Okay. But really the last 30 minutes where they pulled it all together and it got real sharp and clever, easily elevated to the best of the Hostel films. Number 6, the original Hellraiser. And this is a movie that I started watching, I don't know, like 20 years ago, something like that. I was trying to watch all kind of the classic 80s horror classics, all the icons. And I only watched about half of it, and I was like, well, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. So I actually fully watched it for the first time last year in preparation for the remake. And watching it, it really is such a different film from any of the other kind of horror films of its time, where it's not really a slasher at all. It doesn't play out the same ways. It doesn't do scares. It's very much about this atmosphere. It's about the depravity and what our lusts will draw us towards, what temptation can lead us to. And because of that, it's unsettling in such a different way than other horror movies. And it sticks in your mind. And it's also a movie where if you go into it, having seen other horror films and you go into this one, it's very light on Pinhead. The story is actually fairly simple here. It's just lady keeps bringing people back to feed to Frank and then showdown at the end. But it's all about this mood that it creates and that experience, those desires that it touches on, that is nasty in a totally different way while being also very gory in another sense. Number 5, Hellraiser the Reboot. Now, I'm sure for those of you that are long-term Hellraiser fans, this is probably blasphemy to have the remake on top. But kind of being new to the franchise, not really having nostalgia or deep ties to it, as I kind of mentioned talking about the first one, it is lighter on story, and then the whole original run of the franchise is so inconsistent with the lore, where it's not clear exactly what are they doing with the lament configuration box, what are they trying to accomplish, what does what. There's like an inconsistent set of rules with all of it. It's so for me, the remake felt like finally one movie went, let's have a consistent lore here, a set of rules. It's very clear what people are trying to accomplish, why things are happening, and an actual clear story with twists, turns, reveals, motivations, actual story, actual mythology and lore that you can follow and understand. That's what makes all the difference for me. It doesn't quite have the atmosphere, creepiness of the original one, so it loses a little bit of that, but I would value a story and mythology that I can follow. It's as simple as that. I don't have as strong a ties to the past ones, and this one is a package that works individually the best. Number 4, Wrong Turn. Now, I had never seen this film until a couple years back. Someone sent me the franchise in my fan mail when the new movie came out. Some neat sent it to me. So I was like, all right, let me give this a watch. And immediately I watched this one and I went, this is my kind of survivor horror film. It's a little bit like if you did the X-Files episode Home and combined it with the plot line of Deliverance, except you removed the word that rhymes with grape from the Deliverance aspect of the plot line. It's a simple setup. People make a wrong turn, get in a little bit of an accident, they're stuck somewhere, and they're just trying to survive. But I think it's very effective and it executes that idea really well. One of the things that absolutely elevated this movie above every other movie in this franchise is that, first off, our characters are likable. They're sacrificial. They're resourceful. They're actually trying to help one another, so they're easy to root for. So when someone dies, you actually care. And there's even a few nice little flourishes with the camera. Like there's a shot where they go through a keyhole and then you see a murder on the reflection of an eye. And just stuff like that. It's actually about building tension. You get some gore, you get some kills, but it's not just the inherent shock value of watching these crazy people kill people. You care about the survival. It's before the nihilism set into this franchise where choices didn't matter. Here, characters' resourcefulness does matter. A sacrifice does matter. What you do, the choices you make, actually affect the plot of the movie, so you have an actual story and characters I care about the outcome and what happens to them. So without question, easily the best of the Wrong Turn movies, but a real pleasant surprise. I like this type of movie, and this did it well. In third place, the original Saw. And this movie is an interesting one because with what the franchise kind of turned into, it's a bit of an oddity in the franchise. A lot of the gore is more implied than shown compared to what you get later on in the franchise and in all the movies that it inspired. It presents itself as a mystery where we don't really know exactly what's going on or who is behind it. We're in the perspective of these people trapped in this room as kind of this investigation turns out. And you're slowly unraveling this world of Jigsaw and everything that he's trying to do with his games and his worldview and everything like that, all leading up to this big crescendo finale where it's revealed who Jigsaw really is, and we get that iconic final shot, final line of the movie. Ah!
Game over.
I think it's a very good film. It established this iconic franchise, but it's also a movie that was limited by its budget. The budget was under $1 million, and they had to make this bottle film. They had very few shooting days, so they're in this room. And so like the movie starts off and there's like a 15-minute opening sequence of just people just like trying to figure out what they're doing in the room before the backstory and the plot really even kind of kicks in. And there's things like that I think limit the film for me. It's an incredible achievement what James Wan and Leigh Whannell were able to do with this film, with its production values, even the star power they're able to get. But like I said, I don't think it's a fully classic film actually itself. Our runner-up, Saw 2. Continuing off of what I said, because the first movie was a hit, the second movie they had a bigger budget, and because of that, I think it does all the things that I liked about the first movie, but better. It's bigger. It can be structured in a fashion to tell the more seamless version of the story, whereas the first one was structured around the low budget and what they were able to do rather than what's the best version of the film. And most importantly, Jigsaw is the lead of the franchise. He's the star of this franchise, and he's kind of very minor in the first film. Here, he gets to be front and center.
I've never murdered anyone in my life. The decisions are up to them.
Not on his deathbed dying, trying to survive, but dying, but not quite there yet. So it's the movie where we first really get to know him, figure out what makes him so interesting and fun, and how he toys around with people. You get a more elaborate and bigger game that characters are in. The game ties into the main story. When we do our big crescendo twist at the end of the film, it ties it together, both sides of the story, the Jigsaw being interrogated as well as the game taking place. It's a twist that works. It's clever.
Sit here and talk to me. What? If you can do that long enough, you will find your son in a safe and secure state.
And it just has all the stuff I liked about the first film with just a little bit of a bigger version of it, a streamlined version of it. And with Jigsaw in the lead, that's the thing that easily pushed this one ahead of the original film. But coming in at number 1, Saw X. 2 months ago, whenever I started watching these movies to do this 31 on 31, to do my updated Saw ranking, I would not have guessed that the 10th Saw film, I would safely and easily say, is the best out of all 31 films. And then I saw the movie at Fantastic Fest, and I was like, that's it. It only took them 20 years, but they cracked the code for how to like really do a well-rounded Saw film. Like they just pulled it off. I was like still a month later, I'm like, they did it. Wow, they really pulled it off, and they did it. That's awesome. And it's not like they radically changed the formula. They just shifted it just a little bit, where Jigsaw is now our actual lead character. He's actually the point of view character we're following. He's designed to be sympathetic, where you really feel the desperation that he has to survive. They introduce villains into the mix so that the people put in the games, it's easier to enjoy watching someone being tortured to death if they're definitely a bad person. They definitely have done something to deserve justice. Now, this might not be the right ethical version of justice, but they deserve some justice. And it shifts the formula just enough that you can experience and have more fun with it.
Sometimes we get sucked into things that are against our nature.
Gabriella had her own free will. And if you can't handle this, how will you handle the rest of our work?
And I think maybe the one that really just like sealed it is like, this is it right here, is the way that they really show John Kramer's moral code, where he's disgusted that this woman would put an innocent child in a game, so much so that they make Jigsaw like this sacrificial hero that it's like, I'll bloodboard myself because he won't let the child die because things turned the way they weren't supposed to go. So it was clever, twists and turns. It was emotional and made John Kramer more interesting and more consistent than he's ever been before, and gave us villains that we wanted to be taken out. So it was like they finally cracked the code on how to like really do a Saw movie right. So it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, remember, we've got a bunch of other ones dropping today with the other members of the On Top stream. I'll try and put them over here. I'll put them down below in the description and the pinned comment. We've been doing these 31 on 31s for several years, so all sorts of different themes. You can check also those somewhere around here as well. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too.